Because in these horrible times, it can sometimes feel shallow to be a creative and to be talking about something that seems shallow like romantasy. But my goal and the goal of this channel, since I started to really do this full time, is to marry pop culture and politics in a way that felt and still feels accessible. And I did film this also before the latest Romantasy drama, but at its core, the issues with Romantasy and the discourse surrounding it is really part of the larger conversation of where do politics fit into what we consume as individuals, right? And as someone reminded me, despite people reading The Hunger Games, people didn't know that Rue was black and resented having to sympathize with a black character. J.D. Vance has talked about how his conservatism is shaped by the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Conservatives like Stephen Miller love Star Trek. They see themselves in Starfleet despite the very liberal leanings of those products. Since your favorite problematic times on online history, we have tried to decide how much of what you are is in what you consume. And I think that while we might just want art to be art, we also know that art is political. Art weaves together messages and delivers to us propaganda wherever we go. And do I think that watching Clint Eastwood movies and enjoying them makes me capital C conservative? No, not inherently. But if I ignore the fact that movies like his and other Westerns are perpetuating a narrative about the American West, that is a choice that I make. And that is the difference between the art being me and me just watching something I enjoy. And I think that we try so hard to maintain that balance that we just give up accountability for critical thinking skills. Escapism is necessary, but it cannot be a shield for critical thinking, and that is something all consumers need to think about. So while the subject of this video is romantasy, it could easily be a medical drama show, all the propaganda that we consume, fantasy, because at the end of the day, we have to ask the question, who and what has to be ignored in order for you to enjoy your escapism? Enjoy the rest of the video.
It's time to do.
Romantasy is a genre at the intersection of multiple conversations about female authorship, female readership, and the politics of literacy and taste. None of these questions are new, but in a social media climate where everything is content and anyone can be a critic regardless of if they peddle anti-intellectualism, we are constantly developing new battlegrounds for this discourse war. As someone who loves fantasy, loves romance, loves smut, but also loves criticism, it has been interesting to watch this conversation ebb and flow. Because when two things are true at the same time, especially within the topics of gender and pop culture, there is a messy nuance to play in that I can't resist. Let's get into it. It's burning.
5, 6, 7, 8.
As of 2025, the Spice Girls are the best-selling girl group of all time. The group formed in 1994 with members Mel B, Scary Spice, Melanie C, Sporty Spice, Emma Bunton, Baby Spice, Jerry Halliwell, Ginger Spice, and Queen Victoria Beckham, who's a dame now, as Posh Spice.
And I'm Victoria Malcolm.
They were formed by a father and son producer team who put out auditions to create a group of female talent that would be able to compete with the boy band crazes of Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. The 90s were no stranger to hit girl groups. TLC formed in the 1990s, and their 1994 album Crazy Sexy Cool eventually went diamond, becoming the first girl group in history to achieve diamond status. Destiny's Child would follow at the tail end of the 1990s, becoming even more iconic in the early 2000s. And then, of course, birthing Beyonce. But when Wannabe debuted in 1996, it made the Spice Girls a global phenomena that still carries weight among us millennials who grew up with them.
Does my dress look too short?
No.
Part of their appeal was their use of girl power and friendship as a major part of their brand. They were a pop girl group for the girls. I am a fan of the Spice Girls, but the origin of the slogan girl power, especially in the context of this era of girl groups, originated from the American punk group scene of the early 90s, grassroots female musicians mostly, who formed organically from a need to truly be heard. Bikini Kill, formed by singer and songwriter Kathleen Hanna, guitarist Billy Karen, bassist Kathy Wilcox, and drummer Toby Val, were the best-known trailblazers of the Riot Grrrl underground feminist punk movement that emerged during this time period. They were explicitly punk, anti-establishment, and anti-capitalist feminist groups that talked openly about rape, domestic violence, sexuality, racism, patriarchy, and female empowerment. As explained in the book Girls to the Front, The True Story of the Riot Grrrl Revolution by Sara Marcus, an incredible read, the Riot Grrrl movement came after an era in the 1970s and 80s where feminism had taken a beating reputation-wise, being seen as man-haters and unsexy lesbians. Young women were therefore looking for an outlet to talk about the sexual harassment and violence they faced, and Kathleen Hanna, who was both a sex worker and who volunteered for Safe Place, a domestic violence organization in Olympia, saw the need for this in her work. She had started a discussion group there for teenage girls, and hearing those girls talk openly with one another about their past traumas, watching how supportive the girls were of one another, Kathleen felt she was witnessing one of the most beautiful things in the world, and she would start her first girl group as a response to this. The Spice Girls and the female-led punk groups of the Riot Grrrl movement had similar messages of female empowerment and solidarity, but where the latter was an underground, grassroots music movement made up of radical politics, the former was selling you something with male executives behind the scenes, and sell you something they did. Within 18 months of releasing Wannabe, the Spice Girls would sign endorsement deals with companies including Pepsi, Polaroid, Cadbury's, Chupa, Chubbs, I'm assuming these are British, and Hasbro. By the end of 1997, they'd collectively earned around $500 million from marketing alone. Girl power was everywhere you looked, in Technicolor block capital letters that stood for nothing much at all. In comparison, the Riot Grrrl movement struggled in many ways with the media infantilizing them and treating their movement as suburban teen white girl rebellion. This was despite them being very active in protesting George H.W. Bush during the height of Desert Storm, which was very popular at the time. There was a desire in mainstream media to turn them into kids playing revolutionaries rather than acknowledging their response to these moments. If Riot Grrrl was trying to sell something, it was a sense of collective female togetherness that was always to a certain degree going to let someone down because it did stand for something, and as you know, it's hard to be involved in social justice without someone well-actuallying you somewhere in the comments. Yet the song of girl power was being heard on all sides. And the chord is one that plays out very similar to how choice feminism works today. The ability to be feminist, but without explicit politics that would turn off men. We had sexy feminism, and it was branded so that there was a Spice Girl for everyone. Their message wasn't exactly revolutionary, but their packaging certainly was. Bursting onto the scene in midriff bearing, faux military garb, and a mission to teach girl power to the tween set, they were initially scoffed at by feminists. In a Rolling Stone interview, Kim Gordon memorably called them repulsive, but they struck a chord with young millennial girls who made them one of the best-selling groups of all time. Conversations about this difference can easily be co-opted into ideas of artistic elitism, that this idea calls mainstream popular femme music less radical. But that I feel is disingenuous. Pop music can be radical. Madonna and Janet Jackson proved that for their entire careers. When MTV launched in 1981, it turned the nature of pop and rock stardom inside out. What you looked like as an artist became overnight as crucial as the sound you made. Artists such as Madonna, Cyndi Lauper, and Tina Turner, whose unique aesthetics made them immediately recognizable on screen, flourished within the new medium. But Madonna and Jackson both seemed to recognize all the ways in which videos made women targets. They made sexually, politically popular music, talking about female pleasure, breaking down stigmas about HIV and AIDS at a time time when that was just not done. I think we have forgotten just how important Madonna really was in recent years. Mostly, they demanded to be taken seriously and performed their public artistry in a way where you couldn't ignore them. Until, of course, eventually mainstream media helped turn them into jokes. Because a woman's role in popular music was to be heard, but not fully seen. After all, we're here to have fun, to turn our brains off, to enjoy the fluff. And it is okay to call something what it is. Fluff. Fluff with a message, fluff with a fun beat, fluff with good intentions, but there's a reason why fluff often rises to the surface. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that women can market feminism without fully understanding the politics of it, and it's our reluctance to understand that difference, which leads to every take about Sabrina Carpenter that happened over the summer. When it comes to the art that women and other marginalized genders create, there are these dueling desires. On the one hand, a desire for art to simply be art, not to always be a manifesto, to be allowed to be mediocre like the boys do. On the other hand, there are those who accept that, yes, you do have the right to write fluff and be mediocre and apolitical, but we should be able to call it that without it being seen as an attack on you as an artist. You don't want to be political, Taylor Swift, so okay, we can acknowledge that. Art is, after all, a product meant for consumption, and that means criticism. But criticism isn't always fun, and sometimes the girls just want to have fun. It is this complicated back and forth that has been in the back of my mind since the Romantasy's Grrrlies conversation on TikTok. Back in November, an author and creator who I'm not going to name released a TikTok and I think a video on YouTube where she said, "We all know that Romantasy girlies are not the brightest sparks, and that the most popular romance fiction is conservative propaganda for straight women with a patriarchy kink." That's a lot for Elmo. Then she goes on to praise the book What Fury Brings by Trisha Levenseller. We'll get into that part later. It's provocative, gets the people going, on purpose because it's done to promote a book within that genre, and that makes everything kind of feel extra icky. The tone in which this was said only serves to make people, even those who have many issues with Romantasy, recoil, because it's just done in such a way that feels like it's reproducing misogyny rather than seeking to educate people on the issues within romance. And I don't see that as tone policing, because being a feminist and a cultural critic means understanding that genres and things that women and marginalized genders enjoy are often made fun of and hyper-scrutinized in the public eye. Going into these discussions requires understanding that and also respecting the genre enough to take it seriously, which is why I think the criticism of Romantasy is necessary from people who enjoy romance, enjoy fantasy, and have the language to discuss things beyond like or dislike. Because romance and fantasy as genres can be radical, and they can also reinforce stereotypes, eugenics, imperialist propaganda, and promote conservative gender norms, even while taking in 9 inches of ice barbarian cock.
Okay, horoscopes!
I don't believe star signs. You see, you wouldn't because you're an Aquarian. Aquarians don't believe in anything. Well, I don't believe that either.
Romantasy is a subgenre combination of romance and fantasy that has equal focus on both the romantic elements and the fantasy elements. A majority of these works are written by women. And I will start out by saying, to clarify, that I actually do enjoy some Romantasy books. I am not anti-Romantasy. I grew up reading the urban and paranormal fantasy series of Laurel K. Hamilton, Kim Harrison, Patricia Briggs, L.A. Banks, rest in power. I can vibe with a sexy, smutty plot with a tiny, itty-bitty female main character and a big, brooding man with a huge, again, 9-inch whatever thing cock. I'm an adult, right? And I also think the blending of romance and fantasy makes a lot of sense, considering both are genres that are not taken seriously, with fantasy being seen as nerdy and childlike, full of magic and wizards and dragons, derogatorily, unless it's paired with tits and blood.
You want a good girl, but you need a bad pussy.
Romance, despite being a massive part of publishing's money, is treated with disdain and called dirty, smutty, trashy. It's grandma porn or mom porn, as if mom can't flick her bean, as if grandma still can't get it. This is a stigma that Romantasy has inherited, since the genre tends to lean more adult and sexually explicit, which is not inherently a bad thing. As noted before, sex does help sell, especially when it appeals to the male gaze. Unfortunately, a fair amount of popular Romantasy is attempting to do epic style fantasy adjacent stories with huge stakes, political intrigue, all of the things, with not a lot of well-developed world building. All of the world building exists to enforce the relationship between the two main characters, something that works in a traditional romance where you only have 303 pages to get everything done. Now, I love the romance genre. I got into it almost a decade ago. I adore a fun historical romance. Give me a heaving bosom, tightened trousers, and askew cravat. Those books will still have some really fun stakes, usually historically adjacent, but the romance is very personal and intimate, and the historical period adds natural tension. And because I'm toxic, I like a little, little sprinkling of historically accurate racism and homophobia to really season the stakes, makes them feel extra high. I really love Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Much like with Twilight before it, which can itself be considered a paranormal romance and therefore a mainstream ancestor to Romantasy, yes, there is an issue of people making sexist and homophobic comments about these works based on who the fan base is and what they look like. However, also, again, like Twilight, there are legitimate issues of sexism, racism, ableism, and colonialism in these same books. When reviewers point out bad prose, problematic elements that seem unintentional, and all of these issues, the response often is from fans, it's not that deep, which is, for someone like me who analyzes even things that they love, just stick a knife right into my chest. How does it look that when people treat this very popular genre seriously, they are seen as just being haters? And I understand it, genre work is complicated. I love horror. Horror gets a bad rap all the time, but there is also a huge library of horror academics. There are people whose passionate goal is to analyze this genre and take it seriously. So the same is true with romance. It should be analyzed and taken seriously, and you can still enjoy the bodice ripper equivalent of a slasher. I went to a Romantasy panel at a big convention, and the panelists were, with only one exception, white. The panel was overall meeting the audience it was aiming for, which is totally fine. But two things stood out for me. One was that many of the women on the panel lamented that female fantasy authors were often forced into young adult in the way men were not. Secondly, that one of the panelists was Trisha Levenseller. As I said, we would get back to her. She explained the premise of her book, What Fury Brings, which is a dark romantasy story, which, as she explains in the panel, came about of her taking all the bad things that happened to women and making it happen to men. It's a matriarchy where women are powerful because of sexual dimorphism, which means that the females are now bigger than the men. And from some people who have read the book, apparently there is a penis guillotine. These two things are linked to me because it speaks to a lack of knowledge of sci-fi and fantasy female authors that are older than the last 20 years of popular publication, and that disconnect between what female authors have already done and what you think is new now, even if it isn't. Women have always had authorship in the speculative fiction genre, but even if we were to take that genre to its most recognizable first author, that would be, the big dog Mary Shelley, baby.
It's just big meat.
The numbers in reality tell us that despite great female authors that we have had, male fantasy authors still outnumber them in general, and they do get more of the acolytes. That is absolutely true. As someone who loves fantasy, I have also felt the sting of male white gatekeepers within the genre. You can see this in any video in which I talk about fantasy and race. Even if you do the reading, know the right language, and if you share some of the same opinions, you are still constantly being graded. It's not enough to like it, you have to perform liking it the right way. Secret is, there is no right way. The game is rigged, and that's just an unfortunate part of the game. They don't want you in this space regardless of if you know what you're talking about. Despite the existence of many acclaimed mainstream female fantasy authors, there has been a distrust, a bias against female fantasy authors. And I like to make a distinction between acclaim and mainstream audiences, because there is one. If we simply use the Nebulas as an example, the first Nebula Award went to Frank Herbert's Dune, and among the nominees was Cade Willem. Black gay writer Samuel Delany would win the award back-to-back in 1966, where he tied with Daniel Keyes for Flowers for Algernon, and then again in 1967. The fifth winner of the Nebula was Ursula K. Le Guin in 1969. Nice. So despite the douchebaggery you may see when it comes to the awards, there is slightly more diversity than one would expect. The Damon Knight Memorial Grand Master Award, which sounds like a KKK membership, but it is not. It's just unfortunate that a lot of neo-Nazis are nerds, has been given to 11 women over the years. Andre Norton in 1984, Ursula K. Le Guin in 2003, Anne McCaffrey in 2005, Connie Willis in 2012, CJ Cherry in 2016, Jane Yolen in 2017, Lois McMaster-Bujold in 2020, Nalo Hopkinson in 2021, Mercedes Lackley in 2022, Robin McKinley in 2023, and most recently, my GOAT, N.K. Jemisin in 2025. These are women and women of color who have written amazing, complex, radical, fun adventure stories despite the industry being as sexist as it is. Ursula K. Le Guin was writing about gender as a construct in the 1960s. Where this desire to gatekeep comes from, in my opinion, is because of those who have an attachment to sci-fi and fantasy as part of a masculine power fantasy brand. Many of these works tie into the past with its roots in adventure novels of the peak British Empire, along with Western imperialism, and we retain that Western focused look. We see this whenever there's a call for women to not be tit first or half naked in a video game, when that's not the same for male characters. Female authors, by extension, are often treated as woke until proven otherwise. This is why some female authors will make their names gender ambiguous by putting initials first. The other reason that male readers will cite not wanting to read female stories is romance. Ick. Men and women kissing, how gross. As mentioned in this article by Book Riot, there's also an issue of people making a book YA when it isn't actually categorized this way. In an interview with Rebecca Roanhorse, this was addressed. Interviewer said, "I noticed that Trail of Lightning is being classified as a young adult novel by some readers, although it doesn't seem to be marketed that way. Do you think of Trail of Lightning as an adult?" No, Trail of Lightning is an adult science fiction and fantasy, although if it has crossover appeal for YA readers, that's great. I hope as many people as possible enjoy the book. While working on this, it reminded me of the book The Queen of the Tierling. Does anyone remember that? I remember when this book was coming out, people were comparing the main character to Katniss, and I remember shelving it in the YA section of our bookstore. And when I read the book, there was a moment where the main female character called another woman a cunt. Now me being, of Anglo-Saxon stock, this was not alarming to me, but I was like, this doesn't feel very YA. The book is now categorized as sci-fi fantasy, but the vibe was very much YA because the main character was 19. But we have to remember that Paul at the beginning of Dune is 15, and most of the Game of Thrones POV characters are teenagers when the stories begin. We know there is a difference between coming-of-age stories with a young protagonist versus a young adult novel. When the character is a young woman and romance is a part of of the story that is flattened, especially by a publishing industry that knows that romance sells but is also stigmatized. It also allows male readers to lament that they are being ignored, even if that is not actually true when it comes to the biggest names and titles in the genre. Add on to that the defense of sexist language, writing, and sexual violence as being historically accurate, and an inability to understand nuance among female characters who do not perform gender correctly by being feminine, genre savvy, or tomboys. It's the whole reason why Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon are the way they are. We have a rich genre that has a wonderful history of potential when it comes to representation, but an audience that wants to use these books to live out their male power fantasies, even if the books themselves push back against that. But women are doing that too. The difference is they tend to like the men they write about. There's also this question of why do we talk more about women's literary interests than men? You know, the answer for me when people say that is that I'm not playing World of Warcraft. I'm playing Hello Kitty Island Adventure. More seriously, I'm in community with women and femmes and queer people. Female critics in the arts also critique men all the time. We have a rich vocabulary of ways in which we dissect and analyze the way women are represented in comic book movies, James Bond movies, Transformers. Female critics of pop culture and literature already do that work. Fantasy and romance have also mixed before, with paranormal romance and urban fantasy, subgenres that were overwhelmingly heralded by female authors. We had Kelly Armstrong, Nalini Singh, Christine Fahan, Karen Marie Mooning. And if you think you've read Faye Smut and you haven't read Karen Marie Mooning, you ain't seen nothing yet. Not only do we very much have adult female fantasy authors who write romance-leaning work, it was also very popular. 54% of the paperback fiction sold is romance fiction, and paranormal romance, that is romance including any element beyond the range of scientific explanation like ghosts or time travel, rivals and often surpasses in popularity fantasy novels containing similar elements. Not entirely taking gender out of it, but a part of the reason why a lot of female authors got pushed into YA post-Twilight was because paranormal romance young adult was very popular. Teenagers were eating that shit up. Hush Hush, Fallen, Shiver, House of Night, all terrible. Let's not forget, ACOTAR used to be YA. It originally was a Beauty and the Beast reimagining. It only got smutty now. Those audiences are now in their 30s. That has reflected in what is popular. Dystopians, that fuck. Magic schools, that fuck. Monsters, that fuck. And that is fine. That is still enjoyable. I read a lot of those things. What frustrates me is when that becomes the only face of female fantasy authorship. Because frankly, it's reductive. It ignores the amount of work female authors have done, especially when it comes to race, gender, and society. For example, with What Fury Brings, not only does that premise sound very white femme-centric, but it also sounds like a lot of the same gender conversations female fantasy feminists were having, say that 3 times fast, in the 60s. Not to mention, female-led societies has been a subject of fantasy exploration in some way or form since the 1800s. An example that came to mind is The Gate to Women's Country by Sherry S. Stepper, which has a lot of ecofeminism, which was a very big thing in the 70s and 80s. And the concept is that 300 years into the future, after a catastrophic war, nuclear war, of course.
It's pronounced nuclear.
It has fractured the United States into several nations, a la Hunger Games, right? And the new society is called Women's Country, where women would live inside of these wall cities, dedicating themselves to education, farming, rebuilding, while the men live outside as warriors and protect the city, and they are savage, and we don't really trust them. They're bad because they are very hyper-masculine. As it was written in the 1980s, it is very much along the traditional gender binary, but discusses these systems and the implications for child raising and its impact. So it's dated, but it has good bones for further development. In the current day, our ideas of gender in a feminist way have evolved much further than this. Yet we seem to still be repeating a lot of the same questions, but with even more limited answers. When I heard Levenseller speak, myself and my friend, who was an Afro-Latino woman, we shared the same thought process. What about men of color who already have a history, especially Indigenous and Black communities, of being stolen? Because the premise of the book is that the women have to steal the men and capture them in order to marry them. And it's just like, who's that for? What about trans men and non-binary people? Where do they fit in this, penis guillotine world? I will be transparent. I haven't read Levenseller's book. I'm most likely not going to. I hope it finds the audience that needs it and will feel moved by its politics. I hope it creates fears of conversation. But if we are going to use feminism and feminine rage as part of the marketing for these books for this genre, then we have to be open to actually discussing how these things end up in execution. I think this is important for a number of reasons, not just because it matters to me and this is my channel, but when we are going to use gender and gender bias as part of a discussion of how women are treated in this space, you should know who has trailed your path. If you are going to dismiss, say, criticism of Fourth Wing because you think it's being targeted and held to a high standard because it's a woman-led, smutty thing, I would simply push back saying that The Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey, a Dragon Rider series with female heroines and a whole epic society, made her the first woman to ever win a Hugo Award for fiction. And her book, The White Dragon, became one of the first sci-fi novels to break the genre ghetto and be on the New York Times bestseller list. And there's dragon fucking in it too. This idea that female fantasy writers started with J.K. Rowling, which some people believe, is something that exists in mainstream, and it erases the work that female writers have done, not only to be taken seriously, but to also infuse their fantasy with feminist politics. We can address the sexism within publishing without infantilizing the space that female authors have worked to occupy. I've been working on a long-form Outlander video for the past few months. I took a trip to Scotland. I've been rewatching the first few seasons and finally watching some of the newest. I have a lot of feelings about the show that you will get to see, but one thing that constantly hits me is how characters like Jamie Fraser are set up as these idealized, safe, benevolent patriarchal men. The benevolent patriarch, as I would define it, is a cis man, usually a white cis man, who is seen as being kind, empathetic, strong, and loving, but still represents and works within a patriarchal system and uses it to their benefit and to their partner's benefit. This is not a new discussion to romance literature. It was most popularly discussed in Reading the Romance by Janice A. Radway from 1985, which spoke to romance readers and also academics about this issue of if romance promote a conservative viewpoint or if it is radical in some way. And on the one hand, as someone who is attracted to men, I get it. We live in a sexist, patriarchal world, and if you are attracted to men, especially only men, which I'm so sorry for those out there who have that struggle, you want your husband to be someone who will use his power, authority, and masculinity to benefit you, to support you. Their empowerment becomes your empowerment, and inshallah you find him. That is part of the fantasy that romance is delivering. It is part of the central promise of the genre. That does not make that choice apolitical because it is a fantasy. Fantasies aren't apolitical. Something in your fantasy can also reinforce gendered, ableist, and racist ideas. Even in queer fiction, there is often sometimes a reinforcement of gendered politics. Also, women are not a politically neutral category. Feminism is not the right to infantilize yourself so you can be a passive consumer. You want to read for fun. That is fine. But when people are illustrating the point that romance is political in certain ways, that is the truth. Interracial marriage used to be illegal. Might come back. Gay marriage used to be illegal. Might come back. People with disabilities can suffer penalties for getting married that forces them to lose their benefits, and so they may not, in some cases, choose to get married. That is political. And there is just something very emotionally unsettling about people using the language of feminism in order to depoliticize art. For so many years, women couldn't make money with their writing unless they already had money. They had to put their entire pussy into that pen because their gender would be held against them. And while I'm glad that has been changing and we can have a variety of female authorship, and that's certainly not the standard that we should be held to, I do think about, you know, in 2012 when Publishers Weekly named E.L. James as its Publishing Person of the Year, and it was the same year that Hilary Mantel had become the first woman to win the Booker Prize twice. Caveat, Hilary Mantel has made a very turfy turn towards the end of her career, but that wasn't known in 2012, and just in terms of writing talent, Hilary Mantel, E.L. James, and it's not even because the 50 Shades books are erotica or romance, it's because the books are not well written, which is the other turn of the screw, because it means that the industry could have always made room to take romance and erotica seriously because they always do sell well, but only when it comes to a series that maintains gendered status quo. Let's not forget, as mentioned in my Monster Fucker video, a part of the romance genre's boom in the 1970s came from Orientalist stories like The Sheik, where women would tame exotic brown coated men with their vaginas with a little bit of rape. You know, because she really wanted it, but, you know, couldn't say it because he's swarthy. Even in Radway's book, she explains that there is no simple answer to this issue of, is reading radical or conservative? Romance reading is a profoundly conflicted activity centered around a profoundly conflicted form. Does the romance's endless rediscovery of the virtues of a passive female sexuality merely stitch the reader ever more resolutely into the fabric of patriarchal culture? Or, alternatively, does the satisfaction a reader derives from the act of reading itself, an act she chooses, often in explicit defiance of others' opposition, lead to a new sense of strength of independence? I think part of the issue that happens with something like BookTok is that we are hearing everyone's opinion. Not everyone reads the same way, and we are all forced into each other's timelines against our will. It means we are often having to confront opinions that challenge us in ways we don't want to be challenged. And you know, I never like to think of myself as elitist, but lately I've had a sort of come to harem moment and accept on a certain level that I am an elitist. I thought that loving Space Jam and Sucker Punch and Rent would prevent this condition from taking hold over me, but I read Anne of Green Gables at a very young age, and I don't think there's any help for me. I have a Janice film tote bag. I love the Criterion sale. I can sit for 3 hours and watch a movie without needing an intermission. I don't even hum along to musicals anymore when I watch them because I think it's bad theater etiquette. I'm a pretentious bitch. That doesn't mean I can't appreciate fun. I liked Wicked for Good, even though it's not a good movie. I enjoy fun things, and I am the first person to understand the need to scroll when someone doesn't like something I like. But critics exist for a reason. And then the other issue, someone put it better than me. On January 1st, 2021, the philosopher at Call Her Daria said, "I don't support all women. Some of you bitches are very dumb." And I think that's really important. My feminist pillars are A Vindication of the Rights of Women by Mary Wollstonecraft, Bone Black, Memories of Girlhood by Bell Hooks, and that tweet. We can pontificate and put a lot of academic terms on the board and the screen, but at the end of the day, the issue is some of you bitches are very dumb. And it's proven time and time again, not with books, mind you, but with politics. Pop culture politics at that. I still remember how some of y'all were moving during the Amber Heard case, or anytime there's a situation to side with a white man, all of a sudden y'all have becoming radical Dr. Umars. All of a sudden y'all worried about snow bunnies on all corners of the internet. Because I guess apparently to some people, the idea of having your door open and being half naked when you order DoorDash is a normal activity. Women on the right are an active and proud part of our political landscape, and guess what? They are reading the exact same books as us. Conservative women also read The Hunger Games. It wouldn't be a bestseller without them. Women of color and black women are also dealing with their own red pill pipeline issues of hypergamy and strict gender roles to the point of homophobia at times, with lingering issues of biphobia and transphobia in terms of who they want to partner with. Women are a marginalized identity, but it doesn't mean that we do not play a role in our own imprisonment.
You desire not to be free, but to make a window in the wall of your prison.
Even as I was working on finishing up the final touches of this video, we had an incident here in the United States that reminded me of this fact. Renee Good was murdered by an ICE agent and was shot 3 times in the face. And then Kristi Noem, another white woman, comes on screen and becomes a vocal piece for the government in order to justify the murder of this woman. I think in this we see exactly why it's important to understand that womanhood is evolving and complicated. I do not think that it is helpful as feminists to dilute the idea that we as women cannot carry within us issues that we perpetuate onto our sisters and onto ourselves. I think it's very important that we not turn against reality in order to just entertain things. Enjoy your stuff, but don't baby yourself to enjoy your stuff. Enjoy it freely with all of your rights.
Also a fact is that you are not really a housewife. You are a full-time lobbyist working to defeat the ERA so that businessmen can continue to make millions of dollars discriminating against women when they work, when they buy insurance, and when they give birth.
No, well, I don't work for anyone.
Oh, great, so you're a patsy. Well, maybe you should stick to baking and leave interpreting the law to the lawyers.
There is this meme that came from the Eric Andre show where he asks Mel B,
do you think Margaret Thatcher had girl power?
Yes, of course.
Do you think she effectively utilized girl power by funneling money to illegal paramilitary death squads in Northern Ireland?
I don't know about that, but...
And I think about that all the time. As the Spice Girls were spreading girl power across the world, they were also part of the Cool Britannia era, an era of British global popularity using the soft power of entertainment. You know, what Japan's been doing ever since World War II to cover up war crimes. But that entertainment was also bound up in Thatcherism. Margaret, the world cheered when she died because she's a bitch, Thatcher, was the first female prime minister of Great Britain, and in typical fashion, that meant she was a hardline conservative, more to the right of Ronald Reagan, a woman known as the milk snatcher, and not in a sexy way. She really stopped kids from having milk in school. In a 1996 interview with The Spectator, Ginger Spice, who is known for wearing her Union Jack dress, said, "We Spice Girls are true Thatcherettes. She was the first Spice Girl, the pioneer of our ideology. Girl power." Margaret Thatcher, the woman who said, "The feminists hate me, don't they? And I don't blame them, for I hate feminism. It is poison." But this is what happens when politics gets divorced from language and movements. Many years ago, I got to interview some of the team behind the show Black Sail's amazing show, Very Hot Pirates. And one of the things that the creators talked about was the way in which pirates were turned to pop culture characters in stories and largely depoliticized. I don't remember the exact words, but the point that was being made is that the easiest way to de-radicalize an idea or a group is to turn them into a joke. Rather than pirates and the age of piracy being very much caught up and connected to the slave trade and colonial naval expansion and rebelling against that, it's all talking pirates and pirate booty and arg and walking the plank. Yo-ho, 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 yo-ho. It's also taking girl power, a flawed but radical expression of 90s teen disenchantment, and turning it into the Spice Girls.
I never know what to wear.
Yeah, it must be really hard for you, Victoria. You know, trying to decide whether to wear the little Gucci dress, or the little Gucci dress.
Exactly.
I love being a woman. I want to be a black woman in every lifetime. There is pride in being a girl, and I think that everyone's path to female empowerment is different. I also truly do believe that part of being a cultural critic is having your ear to the streets and also in the ivory tower. You should be able to navigate both worlds, especially if you love film, because you have to love trash a little bit to love film. Female authors across the board have amazing talent, and it's great to see publishers put money and attention behind them. I want to be a fantasy writer. Robin Hobbs is my goat. I grew up reading Tamora Pierce. I love the romance works of Beverly Jenkins, Rebecca Witherspoon, Alexis Hall, and so many others who have shown how seeing yourself be loved and adored can be a radical act. There is a radical bend to romance that many queer authors and authors of color have shown. Yet, that does not erase the fact that when you look at the romantasy genre, it is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly heteronormative, has weird body politics, and has a vocal fan base that seems not to care if these books are well written or not. And that, to me, is not giving girl power. It's giving Thatcherism. I want to end with this quote from the introduction to Girls to the Front, which again, you should all check out. The self-righteous absolutism of adolescence eventually softens its edges, as it must. But we never stop needing that idealism and energy, that courage to name things as political if they are political, and unacceptable if they are unacceptable. That dedication to crafting our lives and our communities on our terms. Telling stories is just the beginning. This video is sponsored by Bellesa. If you're like me, you are single and cold. And even if you aren't single, it's fun to take some self-care, light a candle, and enjoy some adult entertainment. Bellesa has a new toy that it's excited to show off. The rose. Very cute, very discreet, very demure. It fits in the palm of your hand. And this mighty flower has 10 different modes, 7 suction patterns, and 3 suction speeds, and with all that, still TSA approved. They will get rid of your liquids though. They will do that. Careful with those water bases. And while not submersible, it is splash proof, so you can enjoy it during bath time, but just be wary of having too much fun. And it does use a rechargeable USB charge. Thank God USB-Cs are not everywhere just yet. And as part of their online giveaway, everyone who signs up using the link below wins a free rose suction toy with your order. And I know it kind of sounds silly, but it feels nice, like not in a sexy way, but in a like good quality silicone. But if the rose isn't for you, Bellesa has some other amazing products, including the Pebble, the Air Vibe, and the Flutter Vibe, all great hits in this house. It is a woman-owned company with the goal to have everyone embrace their sexuality, and they have a vast variety of toys that are queer and kink-friendly, and so I think they've just done remarkable work with making some really fun products for everyone to enjoy, and it's not getting any warmer outside. So please enjoy. And again, everyone who signs up wins a free rose suction toy with your order. So stay warm, have fun, and you know, just because it's discreet, you have to be discreet too. Although I live alone, so I don't have to be. I also love the packaging. I also kind of I wish this was also like a case for other things besides just like this very nice clitoris stimulator. Does anyone remember that show Stripperella where they had that villain named Queen Clitoris? Anyone? It's true. And it's in my favorite color. It's nice to be able to accessorize things, you know, like, do I want my lipstick to match my sex toy? Maybe. I don't know what the day's gonna bring, you know? Keeps things interesting. Although, that would be fun. I should have done a makeup look for each sex toy. That's what a real influencer would have done. But me, I just masturbate.